Hey guys, welcome to the Liberal Hive Mind, a channel solely focused on exposing the abundant hypocrisy of the left. And of course, here's your meme of the day, brought to you by 5mind.com. You know, it's exactly like I've been saying, it's the new Democrat coalition. You know, the Democrat Party used to be the party of the white working class, but now it's a different coalition entirely. It's a mix of the SSRI cat lady, then of course the chronically dependent, and the last demographic isn't even really an American demographic, at least not in the traditional sense, because, well, it's the illegal migrant. Yeah, that's the whole frickin' game. Building dependency, and of course when you've run out of welfare queens, well then I guess you just start looking out of country and just creating new dependents. They talk a big game about compassion and humanity and welcoming the stranger, but of course in practice what they're actually doing is a whole lot more pernicious. They are structuring an entire permanent political underclass that will essentially do their bidding. And they don't care what kind of social harms it creates. They don't care about the poverty, the overcrowded shelters, programs and services being overloaded, child labor, children sleeping on the streets. No, they don't care about any of it. In fact, they do care, but it's a little bit backwards. No, the misery they create, of course, is part of the Democrat mechanism. The worse things get, the easier it is to run guilt campaigns on normal Americans who essentially fall for the scam and enable the scam. This is the immigration strategy of the modern Democrat Party, and I got one clip that I think exposes the entire grift. This is what's really going on in New York City. This is what Zoran Mamdani and other woke mayors like him are fighting desperately for. Let me show you guys exactly what's going on. We got some stuff to get into, so let's roll the tape. All right, folks, so I got this clip here. We got this guy in New York City, and he's interviewing this woman on the streets. She's an illegal migrant. She gives details on her living conditions, how she's begging on the streets and bouncing around shelters. And nowadays, when you say shelters for illegal migrants in New York City, you're probably talking about a hotel that's essentially been converted into a shelter, using taxpayer dollars to sustain the entire project. But anyways, just take a look.
¿Qué opinas de que ganó Mamdani?
Yo quería que gane él y gracias a Dios ganó él. Entonces yo, lo que me ha gustado de ese candidato, que escuché que iba a ayudar con el arriendo de los hogares. Entonces,
how come you are not getting help into a shelter? Are you receiving any help?
sí, yo vivo en un Chester. Y yo estoy acá cerca, si no es que lo que pasa es que en el Chester hay algunas veces que dan comida fría y hay algunas veces, ocasiones que dan la comida caliente, lo cual yo tengo 2 menores hijos que están ahorita en la escuela y ellos son los que no quieren comer la comida. Estoy sentada ahorita y tratando de vender algunas golosinas para yo poder comprarle la comida a mis niños.
Ask her how much money she makes out here when she's out here for 5 hours.
En mi hogar somos 3 niños y 2 adultos, que somos mamá y papá. Yo recolecto para mis niños unos $30, máximo $40 a lo mucho y me retiro.
En 2 horas.
En 2 horas.
Do you want to become a citizen?
Sí.
When you become a citizen, do you think you will vote more for Republicans or Democrats?
En eso sí, creo que es en el Yo recién llevo un año aquí, pero verdaderamente doy gracias más al Señor que me hizo entrar por frontera, que es Joe Biden.
And there she is. She basically spills the beans. Of course, unknowingly, she's not aware of the political conversation at large, and that's what makes these street interviews with regular people so immensely valuable. She basically says the quiet part out loud, the part that Democrats will never admit. Her entire American existence and her pathway into the country, well, it's being fully enabled by the Democrat political apparatus. And she even says it outright that she likes Zoran Mamdani. She likes the Democrat Party. If she could vote, she would vote for the Democrat Party. She also mentions how her kids are going to school, but on the weekend she takes the kids on the street with her. I'm assuming it increases the conversion rate when you're begging for money on the streets. And this right here is the Democrat strategy in a nutshell. They created this exact scenario purposely. They built the incentives. You cross the border illegally, you get to go to New York, you get your kids going into schools, you'll have a bed and a shelter, you'll get food, you'll get the basics taken care of. And so, of course, people are willing to uproot their entire lives and go live on the streets in New York City just to get their foot in the door. And a lot of the times it's not for them. No, they're playing the system. It's their kids that become anchor babies. They're kids that are protected by DACA, that get to go to school and be fully embedded into the system. If the child is born on American soil, then suddenly a new American citizen is born. Anchor babies. It creates a legal link. And on top of that, you got the whole stack of benefits that are piling on, especially on a state level and mostly subsidized by federal tax dollars that are coming in for these programs. And so when you have that whole scenario, well, you know exactly how the story ends, right? These families will be loyal forever to the Democrat Party, the party that blocked deportations, that wrote the sanctuary city policies, that demonized and attacked ICE. And of course, there's a propaganda play here as well. You see these situations of people living on the streets and it pulls at your heartstrings. Nobody likes hearing about kids living on the streets, but that in fact is the point. This isn't some natural strategy. The whole thing is orchestrated and set up. And you see it on the surface, sometimes children hustling on subways or selling stuff on the streets, and you might think to yourself, wow, they're literally on the streets in America. That's just crazy to think that this is a family, almost like a scene you'd see in a third world country, living on the streets, but many times they're going back to a shelter, they're hopping in a car and going to a home, their lives are propped up and taken care of by the generous American welfare system. But regardless, it's the optics that really hits your heart. And that is purposeful. Democrats are willing to create an entire subclass of people that are living an unjustifiably low standard of living, or you might perceive that upon first glance. They got no papers, no language skills. There's no real pathway for them to thrive, and so they're simply surviving as part of a permanent, illegitimate underclass. But then Democrats get to flip it and weaponize that suffering and the optics that you see on the streets here to use that essentially as emotional fuel to justify the exact same policies that are causing it and enabling it. They create these situations, then point and say, look at this mom living in a shelter. Look at the kids. If you send them back home, you are a racist monster. They essentially create the problem and then point at the problem and use it to morally blackmail you into supporting their long-term political agenda. And that's why you ought to be scared of, because guess what happens if Democrats decide to nuke the filibuster? If they regain control here? If they stack the Supreme Court? Make D.C. and Puerto Rico a state? What's going to happen? Are they going to grant mass asylum to all illegals? At that point, the country is lost. There is no more America. Officially, America will become what is known as a post-national state. And so you think you're voting for compassion, but really you're voting for a totally subversive agenda. And it's not just the sob stories. That's not the only point of hypocrisy. It's also the economics of it as well, because the whole pitch is that it's better for you, right? You can't exist without illegal migration. But that's just the system that they've created. Across the Western world, the agenda is the exact same. Stagnating governments, self-flagellating countries, high taxes, destroying your own industries, shipping away all your jobs in manufacturing. The opposite of a productive, strong economy, but it's essentially by design. Destroy your productive economy and then replace it with population growth and mass importation of cheap labor. It's a trick. That's exactly what Joe Biden was doing throughout the 4 years of his administration.
I wasn't skeptical of it, but I had to think on it for a minute. I was like, I never thought about that mass wave of 20 million people flooding in, being given all kinds of support. But I was shocked to find in the case of PrimeLend that they were lending to people without social security numbers or any credit history.
Correct. And I'm sure we're going to find that out also in the housing market. There were probably some homes bought by illegals with no credit, nothing. You got to remember that, when you bring 20 million people, it's a lot of people, and it happens super fast. And they were given all sorts of government goodies. And there was an ecosystem around this illegal, logistical, willful operation done by the government. And we were running 8% deficits. So we still don't have a handle on how much of our treasure was given to these people that then they turned around and put back into the economy in the form of grocery spending, goods spending. If you came from Guatemala and you were given a social security number and some handouts and some SNAP benefits and some rental income, any money you got, you immediately spent because you never had money in your life. So the multiplier effect on illegal immigrant is much higher than Joe's six-pack. And, even with all that juice, and we've estimated, between what the government agencies gave directly and what was washed through the NGOs, which is also, we know about the NGOs, that's just a washing mechanism for fraud. We've estimated anywhere from 500 billion to 1.5 trillion was pumped into the economy during the Biden administration.
Bidenomics is working. No, you were getting poorer. Everything was getting worse. But they were able to fudge the job numbers because the population was growing and government was growing. Oh, look at all these illegal jobs and government desk jockey jobs. That's exactly what was going on. Pump the numbers up with bodies, expand the government, and call it growth. Oh, and of course, hope nobody notices because the whole thing's fake. You get the headline GDP, but you also create all kinds of social and economic harms. You're working against the interest of young Americans, and frankly of the country and the country's cultural cohesion as a whole. And really that's the story. It's part of a bigger realignment strategy. The Democrat Party is the globalist party that is willing, that is perfectly happy, it seems, to sell out the nation as long as it creates a situation where they essentially get to permanently rule. National identity destroyed, borders a figment of your imagination, cultural cohesion gone, social trust evaporated, all of it gone. You got to see the big picture because the Democrats, they want you focused on the micro rather than the macro. They want you focused on the poor child that's crying on the street, but not the massively corrupt anti-American agenda, the real monster that's right behind the curtain. You know, you can feel bad for an individual, but still be able to call the whole thing a scam. Democrats enabled that suffering. You don't have to subsidize it and further enable it. The proper thing to do is to end it. People are taking advantage of birthright citizenship. They're taking advantage of the asylum system, of the American southern border that was simply left open for them to cross without repercussion. And that has to be done. That is the only common sense thing to do if you wish to still have and maintain a nation. Anything else is the death of that nation. And that's what Democrats are trying to usher in. Anyways, that's pretty much what I got for you guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.